My 23rd birthday dinner at my childhood home in Cleveland, Ohio, started with chocolate cake and 23 flickering candles, but ended with my entire world crashing down around me. My parents, David and Carol, waited until I had blown out every single candle before sitting me down at our old kitchen table and delivering the most devastating news that would shatter everything I believed about their love and support. They confessed they never actually intended to help me rent an apartment near Northwestern University in Chicago, where I had been studying mechanical engineering for 3 grueling years. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. As I sat there, staring at my parents across the same wooden table, where we had shared countless family meals, I felt my stomach drop through the floor. 3 years of my life had been built on their elaborate lie. And now the foundation was crumbling beneath my feet. Let me take you back to when I was 19 years old and facing the biggest decision of my young adult life. I had been accepted to both Northwestern University in Chicago for mechanical engineering and Ohio State University, right here in Columbus, where I had received a full academic scholarship. The smart financial choice was obvious to everyone around me, but my parents had different ideas brewing in their minds. David, my father, worked as an insurance adjuster for a mid-sized company downtown. He spent his days examining damaged cars and calculating claim payouts, always wearing the same tired expression when he came home each evening. Carol, my mother, taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary School and had summers off, which she usually spent reorganizing our house and planning elaborate family gatherings that somehow always stressed her out more than they should have. They painted such beautiful, convincing pictures of my future independence in Chicago. Carol would sit on the edge of my bed and describe how proud she felt, knowing I would spread my wings and experience life in a major city. David would clap me on the shoulder and promise that they would handle all my housing expenses so I could focus entirely on my challenging engineering coursework without worrying about money or working part-time jobs. Their enthusiasm seemed genuine and heartfelt. They talked about visiting me in Chicago, taking weekend trips to explore the city together, and how this experience would prepare me for success in my career. I trusted them completely, the way any teenage son trusts his parents when they promise to support his dreams. Their words felt like warm hugs, wrapping around my future plans. So I made the decision that would change everything. I turned down the full scholarship to Ohio State and enrolled at Northwestern, believing wholeheartedly that my parents would keep their word. They had never broken a major promise to me before, so why would they start now? I packed my belongings, said goodbye to my childhood bedroom, and moved 4 hours away to begin my new life as a college student in Chicago. My first year living in the dorms went smoothly enough. My parents sent monthly checks that covered my meal plan and housing costs, just as they had promised. I made friends with my roommate Jake, a business major from Dallas, Texas, who had an infectious laugh and could always make me smile even during the most stressful exam periods. Jake became the brother I never had, someone who understood the pressures of being away from home while trying to excel academically. During my sophomore year, I met Emma at a study group for organic chemistry. She was a pre-med student from Sacramento, California, with curly brown hair and the most determined spirit I had ever encountered. Emma could spend 12 hours straight in the library preparing for exams, and she somehow made even the most complicated scientific concepts seem manageable when she explained them. We started dating 8 months ago, and she quickly became my anchor during the increasingly difficult engineering coursework. My relationship with my parents remained solid during those first 2 years. They called every Sunday evening, asked about my classes and social life, and continued sending those monthly support checks right on schedule. I felt grateful for their sacrifice and often told my friends how lucky I was to have such supportive parents who believed in investing in my education and independence. But everything started changing subtly during my junior year. The monthly conversations became shorter and less frequent. My parents seemed distracted during our phone calls, often cutting them short because they had other plans or commitments. When I asked about visiting home for holidays, they sometimes seemed reluctant or suggested shorter stays than usual. I should have paid more attention to these warning signs. But I was completely absorbed in my demanding coursework, and my growing relationship with Emma. Mechanical engineering at Northwestern required every ounce of my mental energy, and I was also working 15 hours per week at the campus computer lab to earn spending money for dates and social activities. My younger sister Haley, who was 19 and attending Ohio State as a sophomore, seemed to be getting more attention from our parents during this time. Every time I called home, they would spend most of the conversation updating me about her sorority activities, her new boyfriend, and her excellent grades in business classes. I felt slightly jealous, but attributed it to the natural result of me being away from home while she remained close by. Then came that terrible birthday dinner that would expose everything. I had driven home to Cleveland, expecting a normal family celebration with cake, presents, and the usual updates about local gossip and family news. Instead, my parents delivered news that felt like a physical blow to my chest. David cleared his throat and looked uncomfortable as he began speaking in a tone I had never heard from him before. He explained that they had been thinking seriously about my future and had reached some difficult conclusions about my level of dependence on their financial support. Carol nodded along while wringing her hands nervously, occasionally glancing at the family photos hanging on the kitchen walls. They claimed that continuing to pay for my housing would prevent me from learning important life skills and becoming truly independent. David said they worried I was becoming too comfortable relying on their money instead of finding ways to support myself like other college students. Carol added that they thought it would be better for my character development if I learned to manage my own finances and housing arrangements. The words hit me like a freight train traveling at full speed. For 3 years, they had encouraged me to focus on my studies rather than working extensive hours to pay rent. They had repeatedly assured me that supporting my education was their priority and their pleasure as parents. Now they were suddenly claiming that this support had been harmful to my growth as a person. But the worst revelation was still coming. As I sat there, trying to process their sudden change of heart, I decided to research my housing options online using my phone. I needed to understand exactly how much money I would need to earn to cover rent in Chicago while maintaining my academic performance. During my frantic internet searching, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. A quick search of public records revealed that my parents had recently made some major purchases that contradicted everything they were telling me about their financial concerns. Just 2 months earlier, they had bought a brand new luxury SUV worth over $50,000. 6 months before that, they had taken a 3-week European cruise that must have cost at least $8,000 based on the photos Carol had posted on social media. The mathematical reality hit me like a sledgehammer. They clearly had plenty of disposable income for expensive vacations and luxury vehicles, but they were claiming financial hardship as their reason for abandoning their commitment to support my education. The foundation of trust I had built my entire college experience upon was not just cracking but completely disintegrating before my eyes. I confronted them immediately about these discoveries, showing them the evidence I had found on my phone screen. David became defensive and angry, claiming that their personal spending choices were none of my business, and that I had no right to question how they managed their money. Carol started crying and accused me of being ungrateful for everything they had already done for me. Their reactions confirmed my worst fears. This was not about money or my character development. This was about them deciding to prioritize their own comfort and luxury over the promises they had made to their son. They had been deceiving me for months, possibly longer, while planning to abandon their financial support at the worst possible moment. That night, I drove back to Chicago, feeling more alone and betrayed than I had ever felt in my entire life. Everything I thought I knew about my parents and their love for me had been revealed as an elaborate performance designed to control my choices and then abandon me when convenient for them. The 4-hour drive back to Chicago felt like traveling through a nightmare that I could not wake up from. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and I had to pull over twice at rest stops because my vision was blurring with tears of rage and disbelief. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, just like the impossible financial challenge that now dominated my future. Back in my shared apartment near campus, I sat down with a calculator and tried to face the brutal mathematical reality of my situation. My current lease would expire in 6 weeks, and the security deposit for a new place would require money I simply did not have. Even the cheapest studio apartments in neighborhoods with reasonable commutes to campus cost at least $1,500 per month, not including utilities, internet, and basic necessities like food and transportation. My part-time job at the campus computer lab paid $12 per hour for 15 hours each week, which generated about $720 per month before taxes. After taxes and other deductions, I was bringing home roughly $580 monthly. The math was devastating and crystal clear. Even if I somehow managed to find the cheapest possible housing and ate nothing but ramen noodles, I would still be short at least $1,000 every month. Jake tried his best to offer support and practical solutions. He suggested I could crash on friends' couches for a few weeks while searching for a more permanent arrangement. But we both knew that was not sustainable for someone trying to complete a demanding engineering degree. His own family was helping him pay for a single-bedroom apartment, so he could not offer me his couch long-term without risking his own academic performance. Emma initially seemed understanding about my crisis, but I quickly realized she had her own financial pressures weighing heavily on her mind. Her parents were both teachers in California, and they were already stretching their budget to support her pre-med studies. She offered to help me research scholarship opportunities and student loan options, but her suggestions felt inadequate compared to the massive scope of my immediate housing emergency. My academic performance began suffering almost immediately from the constant stress and anxiety consuming my thoughts. During lectures that should have captured my complete attention, I found myself calculating rental costs and work schedules instead of focusing on thermodynamics equations or material science concepts. My grades on assignments and quizzes started declining noticeably, which created additional pressure since maintaining a high GPA was essential for my future career prospects in engineering. Sleep became nearly impossible as my mind raced through potential solutions and worst-case scenarios every night. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling while my roommate slept peacefully, wondering if I would be forced to drop out of Northwestern and return to Ohio with my tail between my legs. The thought of admitting defeat and moving back home felt worse than the prospect of homelessness, but both options seemed equally devastating. I tried calling my parents multiple times during the first week after the birthday revelation, hoping they might reconsider their decision or at least explain their reasoning more clearly. David refused to take my calls, and when Carol answered, she would quickly tell me that their decision was final and that continuing to discuss it would only upset everyone involved. She suggested I speak with the financial aid office at Northwestern about increasing my student loan amounts. The isolation felt overwhelming and crushing. Other students around me seemed to have stable family support systems and clear financial arrangements that allowed them to focus on their studies and social lives. I felt like I was drowning while everyone else was swimming comfortably in the same pool, and I could not understand how I had suddenly become the only one struggling to keep my head above water. Desperate for any possible solution, I decided to make an unexpected trip back home to Cleveland to retrieve some belongings and possibly have a calmer conversation with my parents about finding some middle ground compromise. I could not afford the gas money for another round trip, but I borrowed $40 from Jake and hoped the visit might lead to a breakthrough in communication. I arrived at my childhood home on a Saturday afternoon when both my parents were working in the garden. I could see them through the kitchen window, and I noticed immediately how relaxed and carefree they appeared while planting new flowers around their decorative fountain. Their body language showed none of the financial stress or emotional turmoil that they had claimed was motivating their decision to cut off my support. As I walked through the front door using my old key, I could hear my mother talking on her phone in the living room. Something about her tone made me pause and listen more carefully instead of announcing my arrival. She was speaking to someone in a casual, gossipy way that suggested she was talking to a close friend or family member rather than conducting business. What I overheard next changed everything I thought I understood about my parents and their motivations. Carol was talking to my Aunt Linda, my father's sister, about their long-term plans for my future. Her words were casual and matter-of-fact, as if she was discussing the weather or weekend plans rather than revealing the calculated destruction of her son's dreams and independence. "We never intended to support him in Chicago permanently," Carol was saying into the phone. "David and I decided months ago that Spencer needs to come back home and get serious about his future instead of chasing these unrealistic engineering fantasies. There's a good position opening up at Frank's insurance agency, and David thinks Spencer would be perfect for it once he gets over his stubborn phase about college. She paused to listen to Linda's response, then continued in the same casual tone. Spencer is smart enough, but he's always been too idealistic about his career choices. Engineering sounds impressive, but the insurance business is stable and practical. Plus, we'll need someone to help take care of us as we get older, and it makes more sense to have him nearby rather than living 4 hours away in some expensive city. The blood in my veins turned to ice water as I processed what I was hearing. This was not about my dependents or character development or their financial limitations. This was about control and manipulation designed to force me into the life they had chosen for me regardless of my own dreams or abilities. They had planned this betrayal for months, possibly longer, while pretending to support my education and independence. Carol continued her conversation, completely unaware that I was standing in the hallway listening to every devastating word. The timing is perfect because his lease expires soon, and he doesn't have enough money to find a new place without our help. He'll have to come home, and once he's been away from school for a semester or two, it'll be much easier to convince him that finishing his degree isn't worth the debt and stress. She laughed at something Linda said, then added, David handles all the financial planning, but we've been putting away the money we were sending Spencer into our own retirement account. Why should we pay for him to live in Chicago, when that money could be earning interest for our future? Kids these days expect too much support from their parents. A little tough love will teach him to appreciate what he has and stop taking us for granted. I had heard enough. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against the wall to steady myself, as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. They had not just broken their promise to support my education. They had deliberately planned to sabotage my independence and manipulate me into abandoning my career goals so they could control my future and benefit from my earning potential in their chosen profession. The money they had promised to use for my housing was sitting in their retirement account earning interest while I faced homelessness. The European cruise and luxury SUV had been purchased with funds they had saved by planning to abandon their commitment to my education. Everything about their supposed concern for my dependence and character development was carefully crafted lies designed to justify their selfish decision. I quietly left the house without confronting them, knowing that any conversation at that moment would have resulted in me saying things that could never be taken back. The drive back to Chicago was filled with a different kind of emotion than my previous trip. Instead of feeling sad and betrayed, I was beginning to feel something much more powerful and productive. Righteous anger fueled by a determination to prove them wrong about everything. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and growing desperation. My stress levels reached heights I never knew were possible, and I found myself crying unexpectedly during random moments throughout each day. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or doing laundry became overwhelming challenges that left me feeling emotionally drained and physically exhausted. My relationship with Emma began showing serious signs of strain, as I struggled to maintain any semblance of normalcy in my social life. She tried to be understanding about my mood swings and constant distraction, but I could see the frustration growing in her eyes when I would zone out during our conversations or cancel our planned dates because I was too depressed to leave my apartment. During one particularly difficult evening, Emma finally lost her patience with my emotional distance and asked me directly whether I still wanted to be in a relationship with her. Her question hit me like a wake-up call, and I realized that my parents' betrayal was poisoning every other aspect of my life, including my connection with the person who meant the most to me. My academic performance had declined so dramatically that I was genuinely worried about failing my advanced materials science course, which was crucial for my degree progression. Professor Martinez, who had become one of my favorite instructors due to his engaging teaching style and genuine concern for his students' success, asked me to stay after class one Thursday afternoon. Professor Martinez was a man in his early 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had worked as a design engineer for Ford Motor Company for 15 years before transitioning to academia, and his real-world experience made his lectures both practical and inspiring. Many students considered him a mentor figure, and I had always appreciated his willingness to spend extra time explaining difficult concepts. "Spencer," he said, as the classroom emptied, "I've noticed some significant changes in your performance and engagement over the past few weeks. Your previous work has been consistently excellent, but your recent assignments suggest you're dealing with some serious challenges outside of class. Would you like to talk about what's happening?" His genuine concern and non-judgmental tone broke through the emotional wall I had been building around myself. For the first time since my birthday dinner, I felt safe enough to share the complete truth about my situation with someone who might actually be able to offer meaningful guidance. I told him everything about my parents' broken promises, their hidden motivations, and my current financial crisis. Professor Martinez listened carefully without interrupting, occasionally nodding to show he understood the gravity of what I was describing. When I finished explaining my situation, he was quiet for several moments before responding with both empathy and practical wisdom. "Spencer, what you're describing sounds like financial abuse, disguised as parental guidance," he said carefully. "I've seen similar situations affect other students over the years, and I want you to know that this is not your fault, and it's not a reflection of your worth or capabilities. Your parents have put you in an impossible situation, but there may be more options available than you realize." He suggested I speak with someone at the university's student support services who specialized in helping students navigate family financial emergencies. He also mentioned that there might be emergency scholarship funds or work-study opportunities that could provide more immediate assistance than traditional financial aid applications. But most importantly, Professor Martinez offered to write letters of recommendation for any scholarship applications or emergency assistance programs I wanted to pursue. He assured me that my academic abilities and potential had not changed just because my family situation had become complicated. And he encouraged me to focus on finding solutions rather than dwelling on the betrayal. That same evening, I received an unexpected phone call that would change the trajectory of my entire situation. The caller was my Aunt Linda, the same person my mother had been talking to during that devastating phone conversation I had accidentally overheard. At first, I felt my stomach clench with anxiety, assuming she was calling to lecture me about respecting my parents' decisions or to share their perspective on my supposed dependence. Instead, Linda's voice was filled with genuine concern and what sounded like guilt. "Spencer, I need to talk to you about something important," she began. "I've been feeling terrible about a conversation I had with your mother last week, and I think there are some things you need to know about your family's financial situation that might change everything." She explained that she had been bothered by Carol's casual attitude about manipulating my future and had decided to do some research into our family's financial history. What she discovered was far more significant than either of us could have imagined, and it would provide the key to solving my immediate crisis while exposing an even deeper level of betrayal from my parents. "Spencer, I don't know if your parents ever told you about your grandfather's estate," Linda said carefully. "My father, your dad's father, passed away when you were only 2 years old, so you probably don't remember him. But he specifically set aside money for your education because he believed strongly in the importance of higher learning and wanted to make sure his grandchildren would have opportunities he never had." My heart started racing as she continued explaining something I had never heard mentioned in our family. "Your grandfather established a trust fund specifically for your college education and living expenses. The original amount was $25,000, but with interest and conservative investments over the past 20 years, it should be worth well over $40,000 by now." The revelation hit me like lightning. I had been struggling financially while my own inheritance sat in an account that my parents were supposed to be managing on my behalf. Linda's next words confirmed my worst suspicions about the extent of their betrayal. "Your father has been the trustee of that account since your grandfather died," she continued, "which means he's legally responsible for using that money specifically for your education and living expenses. If he's been telling you that the family can't afford to support your college costs while that trust fund exists, then something is seriously wrong with how he's been handling your inheritance." Linda offered to help me obtain the original trust documents and account statements that would prove the fund's existence and show how the money had been managed over the years. She also gave me the contact information for the attorney who had helped establish the trust, in case I needed legal advice about protecting my rights to the inheritance. As we talked longer, Linda revealed that she had always felt guilty about not staying more involved in my life after my grandfather's death. She had assumed my parents were responsibly managing the trust fund and keeping me informed about my inheritance as I got older. Learning about their deception and manipulation had shocked her deeply and motivated her to take action to help me. Your grandfather would be absolutely furious if he knew that money was being kept from you while you struggled to pay for the exact education he wanted to support, she said with conviction. He worked 2 jobs for 30 years to save that money because he believed education was the key to breaking cycles of limited opportunity. He would want you to fight for what's rightfully yours. After ending the call with Linda, I sat in my apartment feeling like the entire foundation of my understanding about my family and my financial situation had shifted completely. For 21 years, I had lived believing I was entirely dependent on my parents' generosity for any support beyond my basic needs. Now I was discovering that I had been financially independent all along through my grandfather's love and foresight, but my parents had stolen that independence while manipulating me into believing I owed them gratitude for their sacrifices. The emotions swirling through my mind were complex and intense. Relief mixed with anger, hope combined with betrayal, and determination battled with exhaustion. But underneath all those feelings was a growing sense of empowerment that I had not experienced since my birthday dinner disaster. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I might have the tools necessary to fight back against my parents' manipulation and reclaim control over my own future. I called Emma immediately to share the news, and her reaction restored my faith in our relationship. She was outraged on my behalf about the inheritance theft, but excited about the possibilities it created for resolving my housing crisis and completing my degree. Her support and encouragement gave me the emotional strength I needed to start planning my next move strategically rather than just reacting to each crisis as it developed. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because my problems were solved, but because I finally had hope that solutions existed and allies who were willing to help me find them. Armed with the knowledge of my inheritance and Linda's offer to help, I threw myself into gathering evidence and building a case that would expose my parents' financial manipulation. The next morning, I met with Professor Martinez again to update him on these developments, and he immediately connected me with additional resources at the university that I had not known existed. The Student Legal Aid Clinic at Northwestern provided free consultation services for students dealing with family financial disputes, and Professor Martinez personally walked me over to their office to introduce me to the staff attorney. Jessica Thompson was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who specialized in family law and had seen numerous cases involving parents who abused their financial control over their college-age children. Attorney Thompson listened carefully as I explained my situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline of events and the specific language my parents had used when cutting off support. When I mentioned the trust fund revelation, her expression became much more serious and focused. "Spencer, if what you're describing is accurate, your parents may have committed several serious legal violations," she said bluntly. "Mismanaging a trust fund that was specifically designated for your education could constitute breach of fiduciary duty, and if they've been using that money for their own expenses while lying to you about their ability to support your education, that could be considered financial fraud." She agreed to take my case on a pro bono basis because the evidence suggested clear misconduct that violated established legal standards for trust fund management. She also explained that the university had dealt with similar cases before and had established procedures for helping students whose parents suddenly withdrew support under questionable circumstances. My first assignment was to work with Linda to obtain all available documentation about the trust fund, including the original establishment documents, annual statements, and any correspondence between my parents and the financial institution managing the investments. Attorney Thompson emphasized that having complete financial records would be crucial for proving mismanagement and determining exactly how much money should be available for my education. Linda proved to be an invaluable ally in this process. She had maintained copies of many family financial documents over the years and was able to provide background information about my grandfather's intentions when he established the trust. More importantly, she was willing to serve as a witness to conversations she had had with my parents about the trust fund management over the years. Through Linda's contacts, I was able to reach the original attorney who had helped my grandfather establish the trust fund. Attorney Robert Chen had retired from active practice, but he still maintained files from his most significant cases and was happy to provide copies of the trust documents that clearly outlined the fund's purpose and management requirements. The trust documents were eye-opening and heartbreaking to read. My grandfather had written a personal letter to be included with the legal paperwork, explaining his hopes for my future and his desire to provide opportunities that his own limited education had prevented him from accessing. He specifically mentioned his dream that I would pursue higher education without the financial stress that had forced him to leave school after 8th grade to work in factories. More damaging to my parents' position, the trust documents clearly stated that the funds were to be used exclusively for educational expenses, including tuition, books, housing, and living costs related to my college attendance. The trustee was legally obligated to distribute money for these purposes upon my enrollment in an accredited university program, and there was no provision allowing the trustee to withhold funds based on personal opinions about my character development or independence. Attorney Thompson helped me file formal requests with the bank managing the trust investments to obtain complete account statements showing all deposits, withdrawals, and investment activity since my grandfather's death. These records would reveal exactly how my parents had been handling the money and whether they had been using it appropriately for my education or misappropriating it for their own purposes. While waiting for the financial records to arrive, I also began documenting the pattern of lies and manipulation my parents had used over the past 3 years. I gathered email correspondence, text message, screenshots, and bank records showing the monthly payments they had been sending me, which I now suspected were coming from my own trust fund rather than from their personal income. Emma became my emotional support system throughout this difficult investigation process. She helped me organize documents, accompanied me to meetings with Attorney Thompson, and provided the encouragement I needed to continue fighting when the process felt overwhelming. Her presence in my life reminded me that I was fighting for more than just my immediate housing situation. I was fighting for the freedom to build a future with someone I loved without my parents' interference and control. Jake also stepped up to provide practical support in ways I had not expected. He used his business networking skills to help me connect with other students who had faced similar family financial crises, and he researched emergency housing options that might provide temporary stability while my legal case developed. His friendship showed me that I was not as alone as I had felt during those darkest weeks. The investigation also uncovered additional layers of betrayal that extended beyond the trust fund mismanagement. Attorney Thompson discovered that my parents had been claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns while I was supporting myself with work income and student loans, which allowed them to receive tax benefits they were not entitled to receive. Even worse, they had been collecting financial aid refunds that were meant to help me with living expenses, but had been depositing those checks into their own account rather than forwarding the money to me. This pattern of financial manipulation had been going on for my entire college career, not just during the recent crisis. As evidence mounted, I began to understand that my parents' betrayal was far more calculated and extensive than I had initially realized. They had not just broken a promise about supporting my education. They had been systematically stealing from me while manipulating my emotions to maintain control over my life choices. The most difficult part of this discovery process was accepting that my parents were not the people I had believed them to be for my entire life. The loving, supportive parents I had grown up trusting were either elaborate performances they had been putting on for years, or they had changed into people I no longer recognized as my family. But alongside the pain of that realization came a growing sense of empowerment and determination. Every piece of evidence I gathered proved that I had been financially independent all along, and that my parents had stolen that independence through lies and manipulation. I was not the dependent, ungrateful child they had portrayed me as being. I was a young man whose own inheritance had been keeping me afloat, while my parents took credit for sacrifices they were not actually making. Attorney Thompson warned me that confronting my parents about these discoveries would likely result in them becoming defensive and possibly hostile. But she also assured me that the evidence was strong enough to support legal action if they refused to cooperate with returning my inheritance and stopping their financial manipulation. As I prepared for what would undoubtedly be a difficult confrontation with my parents, I felt more confident and supported than I had since this nightmare began. I had allies, evidence, legal representation, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. Whatever happened next, I knew I was fighting for what was rightfully mine, and for the freedom to live my life according to my own values and dreams, rather than my parents' selfish agenda. The confrontation I had been dreading came sooner than expected when my parents showed up unannounced at my apartment on a Friday evening 3 weeks after I had begun working with Attorney Thompson. I had not spoken to them since discovering the truth about my inheritance, and their surprise visit felt like an ambush designed to catch me off guard and emotionally vulnerable. David looked more aggressive than I had ever seen him before, while Carol appeared nervous and kept glancing around my apartment as if she was gathering evidence for some future argument. They both seemed to know that I had been investigating my financial situation, and their body language suggested they were prepared for a fight rather than a family reconciliation. "We need to talk," David announced, without any greeting or pleasantries. "Linda has been filling your head with nonsense about some imaginary trust fund, and we're here to set the record straight before you do something stupid that you'll regret for the rest of your life." His immediate mention of the trust fund confirmed that Linda had already confronted them about their financial management, and their decision to show up at my apartment suggested they were feeling pressured by the investigation I had been conducting. Carol's fidgeting and nervous glances told me she was uncomfortable with whatever strategy they had planned for this conversation. I remained calm and invited them to sit down, but I did not offer them drinks or snacks the way I normally would during family visits. The atmosphere in my small living room felt tense and hostile, like a business negotiation rather than a family discussion. I had prepared for this moment by practicing with Attorney Thompson, and I was determined to stay focused on facts rather than getting drawn into emotional manipulation. "I know about grandfather's trust fund," I said directly. "And I know you've been managing it improperly while lying to me about your financial ability to support my education. I have copies of the original trust documents, and I'm working with an attorney to review all the account statements." David's face turned red with anger, and he started shouting about my ingratitude and disrespect for everything they had done for me over the years. Carol began crying and accusing me of trying to destroy our family relationships over money that I was too immature to manage responsibly. Their reactions confirmed everything Attorney Thompson had warned me to expect from people who knew they had been caught in serious legal violations. But their emotional manipulation tactics were no longer working on me, because I understood the game they had been playing. Every accusation about my character was actually a confession about their own behavior, and every claim about their sacrifices was contradicted by the evidence I had already gathered. I listened to their protests calmly while mentally noting the admissions they were making about their knowledge of the trust fund. The conversation escalated quickly when David threatened to disown me permanently and remove me from any future inheritance if I continued pursuing legal action against them. He claimed that family loyalty should be more important to me than money, and that attacking my own parents over a misunderstanding about financial management proved I had become selfish and materialistic. Carol added that they were considering hiring their own attorney to protect themselves from my false accusations and that they would fight any legal action I tried to pursue. She suggested that I was being influenced by people who did not understand our family dynamics and that I should trust my parents' judgment about what was best for my future. Their threats revealed how desperate they were becoming as they realized their years of financial manipulation were being exposed. Instead of acknowledging their wrongdoing or offering to make amends, they were doubling down on their lies and trying to intimidate me into dropping my investigation. After they left my apartment, I immediately called Attorney Thompson to update her on this confrontation and to report the threats they had made. She was not surprised by their reaction, but she was pleased that they had essentially admitted to knowing about the trust fund while also making threats that could be considered attempts to obstruct my legal rights to recover my inheritance. "Their behavior is actually helping your case," she explained. "Parents who were managing a trust fund properly and honestly would not react with threats and intimidation when their adult child asked questions about the account status. Their aggressive response suggests they know they've been doing something wrong and they're trying to prevent you from discovering the full extent of their financial misconduct." Over the following week, the financial records I had requested finally arrived, and the evidence they contained was even more damning than I had anticipated. The trust fund had grown to over $60,000 through conservative investments over the past 20 years, but my parents had been withdrawing money for unauthorized expenses while sending me much smaller amounts for my actual educational costs. The bank statement showed that my parents had used trust fund money to pay for their European cruise, their luxury SUV down payment, home improvement projects, and other personal expenses that had no connection to my education. Meanwhile, the monthly support they had been sending me totaled less than half of what they had been withdrawing from the account that was legally designated for my benefit. Even more shocking, they had continued making unauthorized withdrawals from the trust fund even after cutting off my support, effectively stealing from me while claiming they could no longer afford to help with my education. The most recent withdrawal had been made just days before their surprise visit to my apartment, suggesting they were trying to hide money before my legal investigation could freeze the account. Attorney Thompson immediately filed court papers to freeze the trust fund account and prevent any further unauthorized withdrawals. She also filed a formal complaint against my parents for breach of fiduciary duty, financial fraud, and conversion of trust fund assets for personal use. The legal papers were served to my parents at their home, making this official legal action rather than a family dispute they could continue to dismiss or manipulate. Their reaction to being served with legal papers was swift and vicious. Within hours, I started receiving angry text messages and voicemails, accusing me of betraying my family and choosing money over love. They claimed I had been turned against them by outsiders who did not care about me and that I was making a mistake I would regret for the rest of my life. But their personal attacks on me were nothing compared to the campaign they launched to damage my relationships with other people in my life. They called Emma's parents in California to report that their daughter was dating someone who was suing his own family over money and who had serious mental health issues that made him unstable and potentially dangerous. They contacted several of my high school friends to spread rumors that I had become addicted to drugs and was making false accusations against my parents to cover my own financial irresponsibility. They even reached out to Professor Martinez to suggest that I was suffering from psychological problems that were affecting my academic performance and judgment. Most painfully, they created social media posts portraying themselves as heartbroken parents whose ungrateful son was destroying their family with false accusations, motivated by greed and outside manipulation. Carol's posts were particularly effective at generating sympathy from people who did not know the complete truth about the situation, and several family friends reached out to me with messages expressing disappointment in my behavior. The character assassination campaign was emotionally devastating, but it also proved to Attorney Thompson that my parents were willing to go to extreme lengths to avoid accountability for their financial crimes. Their desperate attempts to paint me as mentally unstable or financially irresponsible actually helped establish that they knew their actions could not withstand legal scrutiny. Emma proved her loyalty and strength during this difficult period by standing up to the pressure my parents tried to put on her family. Instead of being intimidated by their contact with her parents, she used the opportunity to share the complete truth about my situation and to demonstrate that she was proud to support me in fighting for my legal rights. Professor Martinez also refused to be manipulated by my parents' attempts to undermine my credibility. Instead, he reached out to me directly to offer additional support and to confirm that my academic performance issues were clearly related to financial stress rather than mental health problems or substance abuse. As the legal battle intensified, I realized that my parents were not just defending themselves against my accusations. They were revealing their true characters as people who were willing to destroy relationships and reputations rather than admit wrongdoing or take responsibility for their actions. The people who had raised me and claimed to love me were showing that their primary concern was protecting themselves rather than preserving our family bonds. This realization was painful, but also liberating. I no longer needed to feel guilty about pursuing legal action against them because their behavior had proven that they viewed me as an obstacle to their financial security rather than as their son, whose rights and well-being deserved their protection. The legal proceedings moved forward with surprising speed once Attorney Thompson filed the comprehensive lawsuit against my parents. Within 2 weeks of serving the initial papers, we were already in the discovery phase, where both sides were required to provide complete financial documentation and answer detailed questions about the trust fund management under oath. My parents hired their own attorney, a man named Richard Stevens, who specialized in defending against family financial disputes. Stevens immediately attempted to portray my legal action as a frivolous lawsuit motivated by greed and manipulation by outside parties who were taking advantage of normal family disagreements about financial support and independence. However, Their legal strategy fell apart quickly when they were forced to provide complete bank statements and financial records that clearly showed their pattern of unauthorized withdrawals from my trust fund. Under oath, during depositions, they could not explain why they had used my educational inheritance to pay for their personal vacations and luxury purchases while claiming financial hardship as their reason for cutting off my support. David's deposition was particularly revealing because he became angry and defensive when questioned about specific transactions from the trust fund account. His aggressive responses and inability to provide reasonable explanations for his financial decisions made it obvious that he knew he had been violating his legal responsibilities as the trust fund manager. Carol's deposition was different but equally damaging to their case. She broke down crying multiple times and admitted that she had felt guilty about using my inheritance money for their personal expenses, but claimed that David had convinced her it was acceptable because they were supporting me in other ways that balanced out the unauthorized withdrawals. The evidence was so clear that Attorney Stevens advised my parents to settle the case rather than risk going to trial where their financial misconduct would become public record and they could face criminal charges for theft and fraud. The settlement negotiations revealed just how much money they had stolen from me over the years and how little remorse they felt about their actions. But the most shocking revelation came during the final settlement conference when Carol had another emotional breakdown and disclosed information that changed my understanding of everything about my life and my relationship with my parents. In a desperate attempt to justify their treatment of me, she revealed a family secret that they had kept hidden for 23 years. "He's not even really our son," Carol blurted out through her tears, while Attorney Stevens tried unsuccessfully to stop her from talking. "We adopted Spencer when he was 6 months old, and his biological parents are the ones who set up that trust fund. We've been raising someone else's child all these years, and now he's attacking us like we owe him something when we've already given him more than we were obligated to provide." The room fell silent as everyone processed what Carol had just revealed. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet as I realized that my entire understanding of my identity and my place in my family had been built on lies that went back to my earliest memories. The people I had called my parents my entire life were not genetically related to me, and they had been hiding this truth while stealing from the inheritance my biological parents had left for my education. Attorney Thompson immediately asked for a recess so I could process this information privately and decide how it affected my willingness to continue with the settlement negotiations. As we sat in a private conference room, I struggled to understand how this revelation changed anything about the legal case or my feelings about the people who had raised me. The adoption doesn't change the fact that they were legally responsible for managing your trust fund properly, Attorney Thompson explained. If anything, it makes their financial misconduct worse because they were stealing from inheritance that your biological parents specifically designated for your education and care. But the emotional impact of learning about my adoption was devastating in ways that had nothing to do with the legal case. Everything about my childhood and my relationship with David and Carol suddenly made sense in a completely different and painful way. Their emotional distance, their willingness to prioritize their own comfort over my needs, and their casual betrayal of my trust were no longer confusing behaviors from loving parents who had lost their way. They were the calculated actions of people who had never truly accepted me as their real son, and who saw me as an obligation they had fulfilled adequately, rather than as a person they loved unconditionally. The trust fund was not just my inheritance. It was evidence that my biological parents had loved me enough to provide for my future, even though they could not raise me themselves. When we reconvened the settlement conference, I felt a strange sense of clarity and detachment that allowed me to negotiate from a position of emotional strength rather than family loyalty or fear of disappointing my parents. They were no longer my parents in any meaningful sense. They were people who had been entrusted with my care and inheritance and had violated that trust for their own benefit. David and Carol seemed shocked that I was not more upset about learning of my adoption, but their reaction revealed that they had expected this revelation to somehow shame me or make me grateful for their parenting rather than angry about their theft. Their fundamental misunderstanding of the situation proved that they still did not grasp the seriousness of their financial crimes or the depth of their betrayal. The final settlement required them to return all the money they had stolen from my trust fund, with interest, totaling over $68,000. They were also required to pay my attorney fees and additional damages for the emotional distress caused by their financial manipulation and lies about my inheritance. Most importantly, for my immediate situation, they had to provide a lump sum payment within 30 days that would cover all my remaining college expenses, including housing, tuition, and living costs through graduation. This immediate payment would allow me to complete my engineering degree without any financial stress or dependence on their future support. As part of the settlement agreement, they also had to provide me with any information they possessed about my biological parents and the circumstances of my adoption. This was not just legal curiosity. I wanted to understand the people who had loved me enough to provide for my education, even though they could not raise me themselves. The legal victory felt satisfying, but also bittersweet, because it came at the cost of any possibility of maintaining a loving relationship with the people who had raised me. They showed no remorse for their financial crimes, and continued to portray themselves as victims of my ingratitude even after being forced to admit their wrongdoing under oath. But I was beginning to understand that their lack of remorse was actually a gift that freed me from any obligation to maintain a relationship with people who had proven they did not have my best interests at heart. The family bonds I had thought were unbreakable had been revealed as contractual obligations they had been willing to violate whenever it served their financial interests. The money from the settlement arrived in my bank account exactly 30 days after the agreement was signed, and seeing that balance for the first time felt like winning the lottery and graduating college simultaneously. $68,000 represented not just financial security, but complete independence from people who had been controlling my life through lies and manipulation since I was 6 months old. My first priority was securing stable housing that would allow me to complete my final year at Northwestern without any stress about rent payments or roommate complications. I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment just 15 minutes from campus that had large windows, modern appliances, and enough space for a proper study area where I could focus on my senior engineering projects. The lease signing process felt symbolic and empowering in ways I had not anticipated. For the first time in my adult life, I was making housing decisions based entirely on my own preferences and financial resources, rather than depending on promises from people who might change their minds or withdraw support based on their personal agenda. The apartment was mine, paid for with money that had always belonged to me, but had been stolen and returned through legal action. My academic performance rebounded dramatically once the financial stress and family conflict were resolved. Professor Martinez noticed the improvement immediately, and commented that I seemed like a completely different student than the struggling young man who had been failing assignments just a few months earlier. My senior design project became one of the top submissions in the mechanical engineering program, and I graduated with honors, despite the difficulties I had faced during my junior year. Emma and I grew closer through the process of fighting for my independence and building a future based on honesty rather than manipulation. She had seen me at my lowest point and had chosen to support me rather than abandon me when things became difficult. Our relationship developed a foundation of trust and mutual respect that felt completely different from the conditional love I had experienced with my adoptive parents. We started making plans for life after graduation that included both our career goals and our desire to build a family based on genuine love and support rather than control and obligation. Emma would be starting medical school in the fall, and I had accepted a position with a prestigious engineering firm in Chicago that specialized in automotive design and development. The job offer had come through connections I made during my senior project work, and the starting salary was more than enough to support both of us while Emma completed her medical education. We were planning to move in together after graduation, creating our own family unit that would be based on partnership and mutual support rather than the dysfunctional patterns I had grown up believing were normal. My relationship with my adoptive parents settled into a pattern of minimal contact and clear boundaries that protected my emotional well-being while acknowledging their role in raising me. They completed their court-ordered therapy sessions and made formal apologies to other family members they had stolen from over the years, but their remorse seemed motivated more by legal consequences than genuine regret about their actions. David eventually acknowledged that his financial management of my trust fund had been improper, and that his motivations had been more about control than concern for my character development. Carol struggled more with accepting responsibility for her role in the deception, but she did provide me with the adoption records and contact information for the attorney who had handled my placement as an infant. Learning about my biological parents was both heartbreaking and healing in ways I had not expected. They had been college students themselves when I was born, and they had made the difficult decision to place me for adoption because they wanted me to have opportunities and stability they could not provide at their young age. The trust fund had been their way of ensuring I could pursue higher education even though they could not be part of my life. The adoption agency provided me with a letter my biological mother had written to be given to me when I turned 18, but David and Carol had never shared it with me. Reading her words about her love for me and her hopes for my future was emotionally overwhelming but also incredibly healing. She had wanted me to know that placing me for adoption was not about rejection, but about love strong enough to sacrifice her own desires for my benefit. Linda became a surrogate mother figure in my life, providing the kind of unconditional family support I had always craved but had never received from David and Carol. She helped me understand our extended family history and connected me with other relatives who had been kept at distance during my childhood because of my adoptive parents' controlling behavior. Through Linda, I learned that my grandfather would have been incredibly proud of my determination to complete my engineering education and fight for my independence. His own limited education had motivated him to work extra jobs for years to save money for his grandchildren's futures, and he would have been furious to learn that his carefully planned gift had been stolen by the very people he had trusted to manage it. Professor Martinez continued to serve as a mentor and father figure as I transitioned from student to professional engineer. He helped me understand that the leadership skills I had developed through fighting for my inheritance would serve me well in my career, and he encouraged me to use my experience to help other students who faced similar family financial abuse. I started volunteering with the university's Student Legal Aid Clinic, sharing my story with other students whose parents were using financial manipulation to control their educational and life choices. Many of these students felt alone and hopeless, the same way I had felt, and I was able to provide them with practical guidance and emotional support during their own battles for independence. The engineering firm where I started working specialized in designing safety systems for automobiles, and I found deep satisfaction in using my technical skills to create products that would protect families and save lives. My work felt meaningful and important in ways that had nothing to do with my parents' opinions or expectations, and I was earning recognition based on my abilities and contributions rather than family connections or obligations. Emma and I were planning our wedding for the following summer, after her first year of medical school was completed. We had decided to create our own family traditions based on love, honesty, and mutual support rather than trying to maintain relationships with people who had proven they could not be trusted to prioritize our well-being over their own convenience. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that my adoptive parents' betrayal had actually been a gift that freed me to discover my own strength and build authentic relationships with people who valued me for who I truly was, rather than what I could provide for them. Their financial manipulation had forced me to develop independence and self-reliance that I might never have achieved if they had continued supporting me while controlling my choices. The most important lesson I learned was that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and control. Love that comes with conditions and threats is not really love at all, but manipulation, disguised as affection. True family support helps people become their best selves rather than forcing them into predetermined roles that serve someone else's agenda. I also learned that fighting for what is right often requires courage to challenge people who claim to love you, but whose actions prove otherwise. Standing up to financial abuse and emotional manipulation was one of the most difficult things I had ever done, but it was also the most important step toward building a life based on my own values and dreams. The money from my inheritance allowed me to complete my education and start my career without debt or dependence on people who had proven they could not be trusted with my well-being. But more importantly, the legal battle taught me that I had the strength and intelligence necessary to solve difficult problems and protect myself from people who would try to take advantage of my trust. Today, Emma and I are building the kind of family I always dreamed of having but never experienced growing up. Our relationship is based on honesty, mutual support, and shared goals rather than manipulation and control. We are planning to have children someday, and we are committed to raising them with the kind of unconditional love and genuine support that helps people become confident, independent adults. I stay in limited contact with David and Carol, but our relationship will never return to what I once thought it was because I now understand that their love was always conditional on my compliance with their expectations. They missed my graduation ceremony because they were still angry about the legal consequences of their financial crimes, but Professor Martinez and Linda were there to celebrate my achievement and my successful fight for independence. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's harmful behavior, even when that person claims to be acting out of love for you. Setting boundaries and demanding accountability from family members is not betrayal. It is the foundation of healthy relationships that can survive conflict and grow stronger through honest communication. My grandfather's trust fund was always meant to give me the freedom to pursue my dreams without financial barriers. But my adoptive parents' theft of that inheritance taught me something even more valuable. I learned that real security comes from knowing you have the strength and capability to solve problems and overcome obstacles, regardless of whether other people choose to support or sabotage your efforts. I want to ask all of you listening to this story, have you ever had to choose between maintaining a relationship and standing up for what you knew was right? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with people who claim to love you but whose actions suggested otherwise? Your experiences and insights could help other people who are facing similar situations, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or helped you think about your own family relationships in a new way, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in difficult situations. Sharing this video with friends or family members who might benefit from hearing about the importance of financial independence and healthy boundaries would also mean a lot to me. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that supports people who are fighting for their right to live authentic, independent lives. I hope my experience encourages you to trust your instincts, value genuine relationships over convenient ones, and never apologize for demanding the respect and honesty you deserve from the people who claim to care about you. Remember that your dreams and goals are worth fighting for, and you have more strength than you realize to overcome whatever obstacles life puts in your path.